Over the last couple of weeks, think tanks and opinion shapers have used heavy words to describe the state of Kenya's economy. In crisis, headed for turbulent times, in the brink of a meltdown. This is all too surprising for many Kenyans, especially because these same think tanks have been pumping up Kenya's economic standing. Even though critics argue that Kenyans shouldn't be too surprised about the current reality, the president himself has been giving mixed signals about the true state of the economy. Here he is in 2015, upbeat about development.
Lakini hii mambo ya kupiga kelele kila siku. Wanaenda wanadanganya uchumi wa Kenya umefilisika. Kama uchumi wa Kenya umefilisika, hii damu hapa tungeweza kujenga. Si tunajenga na pesa ya serikali ya Kenya. Ingekuwa imetoka wapi?
And here he is, just a couple of weeks ago, talking about the reality of corruption and its impact on the economy.
This war is about the future of Kenya. This war is about our children. This war is about the prosperity of our country. This war is to ensure that we restore integrity, discipline, and honesty in the manner in which we do business in this country. That is what will create confidence in investors. That is what will ensure that the resources of this country are utilized for the best interest of our people and not for the interest of a few.
Now, it's been more than a week since fuel prices went up to accommodate a 16% VAT on petroleum products, and the president has remained silent on the state of the economy or the way forward for Kenyans. Barielo? Naomba maji. 40 bob. Si ilikuwa 30 bob?
Lakini iliongezeka mafuta hiyo.
Mafuta iliongezeka, so maji ni expensive. Sawa. Asante sana. The cost of living is going up and Kenyans are feeling the pinch. And now experts argue that should IMF withdraw a 99 billion shilling facility to help ease the financial burden currently, Kenyans should brace themselves for tougher times ahead.
So where does the IMF come into this whole thing? So a couple of years ago, the government negotiated a facility. Now this facility, I can only compare it to an insurance facility or a guarantee facility. It is a guarantee facility that in the unlikely, right now I think likely event, that our economy does not perform the way it should, we should be able to have a fallback plan on which we can draw the money to pay our debts.
Of biggest concern is the rate of Kenya's borrowing. In 2013, the country's total debt stood at 1.2 trillion shillings. In 2018, Kenya is staring at a total debt of 5.03 trillion shillings. While our borrowing has grown by 30%, revenue has been growing at about 14%. IMF had set conditions that the credit facility would only be available to Kenya if we decreased our borrowing and increased our revenue collection.
The government, in a letter dated, I think, 6th of March, did write to the IMF and said that we have fallen back in our revenue collection because of an elongated election period, and requested to defer by 6 months. Now those 6 months are ending this Thursday.
So it's embarrassing and shameful that Kenya finds itself now having to go into an IMF austerity straitjacket in 2018, because by 2010 we had basically weaned ourselves off of that.
Treasury and other government agencies have shied away from speaking about the IMF facility and our debt deficit. But Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich was confident in our debt position just 3 months ago during budget week.
Countries who are still developing are better off, borrowing in a more prudent manner and sort out their infrastructural issues now for the economies to grow further. That's the essence why you really borrow.
While Treasury has defended government's borrowing appetite to fund big developmental projects, economists argue that this is where the rain started beating Kenya's economy.
Obviously, the SGR is one of them. So the first thing is we bought a very expensive piece of machinery and built a very expensive piece of infrastructure, we paid 3 times the cost, 2.5 to 3 times the cost of what we should have paid for technologies that is 40, 50 years old. So that's the first. Second, we overestimated how much cargo we would need to carry for it to break even.
The debt that we have now, and looking at into the future, we are able to comfortably repay without being insolvent. That is all what it means by sustainability. So as long as we are able to repay our debt and it's not consuming a huge chunk of our revenues in terms of servicing it, our debt is viewed sustainable.
The declared debt that we know, repayment, is going to be 870 billion. Our expected collection, which is projection, is 1.9 trillion. So in other words, we are going to pay about half of what we collect, if we collect all of it, to debt.
If you look at the Institute of Economic Affairs, there are 10, 11 of us here who are economists, right? The Treasury has almost 40 times as much people, more qualified. They could form a faculty of economics that would be formidable, even on this continent. But they didn't know that spending 8% of GDP in deficits every year for 5 consecutive years was going to cause you trouble. I don't think.
The president finds himself between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, he is staring at a sensitive economic period, while on the other, his last term and an opportunity to leave a legacy. What are his options at this moment?
The government stands to gain more and have more money for spending on actual services by dealing with corruption, by dealing with misuse, by dealing with duplication. We still have a lot of agencies in government that are doing the same things that others are doing.
Some of the salary raises that we could have promised public sector workers would have to be deferred for a while. The new hiring that we promised to hire people in the public sector, that would also have to be, unless it's extremely essential, and then you'd have to rationalize.
Actually, we are reaching the point where we no longer have a technical fix for this economic problem. It now becomes a political fix.
Should the IMF terminate the credit facility to Kenya, experts warn that the Kenyan shilling could be left exposed to unfavorable foreign exchange markets. Insiders have already hinted that government is considering borrowing more to ease the current stress. In the end, it is unclear whether this never-ending roller coaster will end for the Kenyan economy. Asha Mwilu on Special Assignment.